This is question 6 in the psychological problems topic, and this is a scenario question. So there's a scenario and there's 3 questions that are related to that scenario. The important thing you need to do is when you read this, it's good to highlight all of the important pieces of information. So the question says, a researcher wanted to find out if there was a relationship between people coping with stressful life events and their incidence of depression. Stressful life events were measured via a self-report questionnaire, the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, SRRS, and the extent of someone's depression was also measured via self-report using Beck's Depression Inventory, BDI. Scores of both were collected. And then you've got question 6A. One factor that could influence life events is modern living. Identify a potential factor of modern living for 1 mark. B. The study above suggests that stressful life events and depression could be correlated. If both scores are high on the 2 questionnaires, what could we assume about depression? 2 marks. And then C, the researcher is collecting quantitative data. How could the researcher collect qualitative data in this study for 3 marks? Now, when you read the question, you will see that it's talking about a relationship. So there's likely to be a question on correlations in there if it refers to a relationship. Also, when you're reading it, it explains what their researchers are going to be investigating. So they're referring to stressful life events and depression. So that is also important because it's then explaining how they will actually measure those 2 things. Now, question A says, one factor that could influence life events is modern living. Identify a potential factor of modern living. Now, if you think about the challenges of modern living, there are quite a few that you could pick out that you would have learned about. Now, I've picked loneliness. Okay, so loneliness is a challenge of modern living, but there are others as well. You could write about the internet and the increased use of social media, because that is also likely to be a challenge of modern living. Another thing which is quite important at the moment is financial problems. That could also be a challenge of modern living. Also, things like pressure at work or school could also be a challenge of modern living. So question B is, the study above suggests that stressful life events and depression could be correlated. If both scores are high on the 2 questionnaires, what could we assume about depression for 2 marks? Now, I've just underlined there high, so if you've got a correlation and if one of your covariables is high and the other one is high, it means that you have got a positive correlation. Now, what that means is that if you have got a lot of stressful life events, that's very high, then that means that your depression levels are also high. So the more stress you experience in life, the higher the depression level. If you have lots of stress in your life, you will have a high depression level. So that's what it's assuming about depression, is that depression is linked. Okay, there's a relationship between depression and stressful life events. You can't say in the answer to this question that one causes the other one to happen, because correlations do not actually establish cause and effect. So you can just say that they're linked. Okay, or if you've got one high on one, then you're going to be high on the other one. So if you've got a high level of depression, you're also going to have a high level of stressful life events. And then question number C says the researcher is collecting quantitative data. How could the researcher collect qualitative data in this study for 3 marks? So if you go back to the scenario, you can see that they collected quantitative data because they would have got a score for the stressful life events, and then they would have got a score for the Beck's depression inventory. So that's quantitative data. So you need to convert that into qualitative, so how you can get more words. Now, there's a few ways that you can gather qualitative data, and that's the more kind of subjective measures of information. So subjective is more about opinions and feelings and so on. Now, the researcher could interview the people and ask them open questions. Now, open questions gathers a lot of wordy information, and qualitative information is to do with words rather than numbers. So they could interview the people and ask them open questions about the stressful life events that they've experienced, as well as ask them to explain their depression to gather qualitative data. You could also get participants to complete a diary of the stressful events that they experience and how they feel during these events. This would produce information in words which could then be analysed. So that's quite a lot of information for 3 marks, okay, but you need to think of lots of different ways that you could possibly gather qualitative data, and you need to make sure you're explaining it in relation to how you can measure stressful life events, as well as how you can measure depression.